this. Let me just slide it ahead. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to offer a prayer before we begin with kind of the structure of our time and everything else. And so if you would, please join me in prayer. Great Creator, Almighty God, enduring in grace and mercy, we gather today to listen, to speak, to ask, and to receive. Strengthen our hearts, minds, and bodies for this time and for the effort that it requires of each of us, that our conversations, comments, and questions would honor you and our common humanity. Amen. Well, thank you again for being here. I am Randall Keeler. For those who don't know me, I am the pastor of a little rural Christian Mennonite church northwest of Freeman, about 3.5 miles, Hootertal Mennonite Church, and I have the amazing privilege of emceeing our time together today. I was honored that people asked me, and so please bear with me as we walk through this. This is my first time doing it, and so any slip-ups are totally Shaquille's fault, not mine. And well, that's a good place to start. This series is hosted by the Freeman Network for Justice and Peace. And if you don't know much about this organization, it was founded as a Christian Mennonite organization or by local Christian Mennonite communities. And to this day, local Mennonite churches and Mennonite church members are still really heavily involved in the network. The mission statement of it is to discern God's transforming voice in the church through prayer and sharing, to practice the church's prophetic voice in the world through projects that can be done locally and globally, as this is one of those, and to discuss possible opportunities for action concerning issues of peace and justice in our community and around the world. Even though this organization is founded by Christians and based on at least our church's teaching, we welcome anyone from any walk of life who shares the same values of justice and peace. And we talk a lot about that, what that looks like and how to welcome folks across different faiths. If anyone is interested in being involved in the organization, you can leave your name, phone number here, or you can visit us on Facebook as well. We actually just got our Facebook page up and running again, and so you're welcome to find us on Facebook and like us and follow future events from here. And then the resource table is kind of right in the center back there, and if you have any interest in reading more about what is happening today, there are handouts and pamphlets and a host of things, as well as I think our speakers today welcome individual conversation as much as their presentations today, so please know to keep those questions and thoughts coming. Behind the resource table is the donation box, and in order to continue to produce these kind of high-quality productions, I guess you could say that. I don't know if it's really a production, but at least a gathering. It does require some cost, and so we're asking of you to offer what you can, what you're able to toward this, especially if it's something you're passionate about and you believe in. And so consider making a donation. And of course, I'm having trouble flipping through pages. So this is all new information to me because I haven't been privy to all of these details, which makes me as much a learner with all of you as we go here. So today's presentation is the first of a 5-part series. The series is titled, as you probably already know, Challenging the Myth of the Israel-Palestine Narrative, a Community Conversation. And we did want to make sure to include that even today, as questions are asked, that this is engaging for all of us, and that if you have something to add to the comments or to an answer for a question, we welcome that because we do want it to be a communally engaged event. As the title implies, we here at Freeman Network for Justice and Peace believe that the current story about the history of Israel, Palestine, their relationship, and the realities of life in those two areas are in many ways a myth. There is some truth to the story, as with most stories, but otherwise the commonly held understanding of the situation is largely false. And I'd be the first to admit that myself, as someone who continues to learn. Our intention for this series is to challenge, of course, that myth, and we plan to hear from different presenters over the next few months to better understand what is true and what are misconceptions. Challenging things in our day, by the way. Let's be clear that if there is ever such a time to talk about misconceptions and plain falsehoods, now is the time. In today's presentation, we will just focus on the religious importance of that land to each of the Abrahamic faiths. We will aim for one presentation about every 4 weeks, and the details of the next presentation are still being finalized, so that's why we say if you would like to be a part of our contact list, please leave your information or like our Facebook page so you can hear it online. Once everything is confirmed, Lord willing, we will post it and get it out to people. Israel and Palestine cover what is often referred to as the Holy Land, and many of us have strong feelings about this land. Our goal today is to hear from the presenters and ask questions and truly dialogue with each other. We just ask that everyone remains courteous and respectful. Sometimes talking about this topic can bring a lot of charged emotions. This is just a reminder to each of us to be considerate of our friends and neighbors here, and remember that we pray for a gathering that builds bridges and brings us closer together. Today's presentation is titled The Religious Significance of the Holy Land for Each of the Abrahamic Faiths. We will learn why this land is sacred to followers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We will first hear from Jennifer Dreisk, representing the Jewish perspective. This will be followed. She'll speak for around 20 minutes or so. We're not holding the event to really strict time lengths. And then when she's done with her presentation, we will offer about 10 minutes or so for feedback, questions, comments. And during that question-comment time, you are also welcome to use the restroom, get refreshments, get a drink. And so please know that there will be no disrespect felt if during that time you need to get up and move, even just to stretch a little bit when we get there. After Jen, Roy Kaufman will present the Christian perspective, and then we'll have another 10-minute period, and then finally we have John Landis, who will present the Islamic perspective. This presentation is also being streamed live online, and I should have welcomed you all online who are joining us. That is my fault. We will also be monitoring the chat feature in that online platform. If any of our virtual audience members have any questions or comments, please do ask and share. And so without any further ado, we will start our presentations. Jennifer Dreisk will be presenting the Jewish perspective on the religious significance of the Holy Land. Jen has a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Religious Studies, as well as a minor in Jewish Studies. Jen is the first ever interfaith chaplain at Augustana University and the former president of the Mount Zion Congregation Synagogue in Sioux Falls. She is also the project manager of South Dakota Faith and Public Life, a board member of South Dakota for Healthy Families, and the chief operations officer of the South Dakota Voices for Peace. Jen, I ask you to join me up here and add anything to that you'd like.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Good. Thank you for this opportunity to come and help dismantle some of the myths that we may have. And I want to preface my presentation. We have a saying in our community, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So what I have to say may be different from somebody else of the Jewish community, but I am humbled and honored to be able to share with you my opinion. So we're going to start out always in the beginning. We are going to stay on topic with our patriarchs that we find in the Torah, because that's how Judaism connects ourselves to the land. So the first person that we want to talk about is Abraham. And Abraham is from around 2000 BCE is when they suppose. And Abraham is the father of monotheism. And once he found the one God, he was promised that he would inherit the land of Canaan. And he was promised that he would have descendants as many as the stars. One of the first things he does is he purchases land for a tomb for Sarah. So that is something that we do in Jewish communities. If we move to a new area, the first thing we do is we purchase land for a cemetery. We don't worry about the building quite yet. So Abraham purchases land in Hebron, and that area is known as the Cave of the Patriarchs. And that is where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. And that is the first time there is connection to the land, right to the land, because it is owned by Abraham. Around 1900 BCE is when Isaac comes into play. He is the son that Sarah had waited for so long. If you remember, she was 90 years old when she gave birth to Isaac. The Hebrew Yitzhak means to laugh. And if you go into the text, you'll remember Sarah laughed. And according to Jewish tradition, Abraham is asked by God to sacrifice his favorite son. And according to Jewish tradition, it is Isaac. And Abraham takes Isaac up to be sacrificed, and at the last minute, a ram is chosen. And at this time, this is when Isaac goes off and he marries, and he has Jacob and he has Esau. And if you remember, there's a discrepancy with the birthright between the two of them. At one point, Isaac has a dream, and he sees the ladder of the angels, and he wrestles with this angelic being. And at one point, the angel hurts his hip and has a permanent limp from this. But after this, he asked for a blessing, and he was given the name Israel. And so this is the first time we hear the word Israel in the text. And Israel means to struggle with God. It's the idea that Jacob was struggling with God in the dream. Jacob does a lot of struggling throughout the whole story. He struggles with Esau for the birthright. He struggles with trying to apologize later on for what happened. Jacob has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. And eventually they move to Egypt because there's a great famine. Joseph is sold into slavery, moves himself up to the Pharaoh, and is able to interpret dreams. So it's about 1700 BCE is when Israel and his sons end up in Egypt. So then around 1300 BCE, then we learn of the story of Moses. And Moses is able to bring the Israelites, the followers of Jacob and the one God, brings them out from Egypt back to Israel. But on their way, they end up at Mount Sinai. And at this time, Moses he is given the commandments from God. And Jewish tradition says that Moses wrote the first 5 books. So he also was able to write, he is also giving the Jewish people the Torah. There is a verse that I find that is very important to me, and that's Deuteronomy 16:20. Justice, justice shall you pursue, so that you may live and possess the land that your Lord God is giving you. I like the first part, justice, justice shall you pursue. And so this is where Moses is telling the people that you need to follow the rules of the Torah, of all the commandments, and do so with justice in mind, and that you will be given the land flowing with milk and honey. The Torah, the commandments that Moses gives to the Israelites, now is the contractual spiritual relationship between the land and the people. You're getting this land of milk and honey, but you have to act in a just way. So eventually they get to Israel. Joshua comes along. Oops, sorry. I got excited and I forgot to change the slides. So we are now at Jerusalem. Sorry about that. So Israelites eventually conquer all of Canaan, but keep in mind that there have been people living in Jerusalem since 3000 BCE. So it's not just Jews that were living in Jerusalem. There's lots of communities that were living there. Tradition tells us that creation began in Jerusalem. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to the Jewish community. The city of Jerusalem has been destroyed twice in its history, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, captured and recaptured 44 times. At one point, there was Israel in the north and Judah in the south, and eventually King David was able to unite them. And then King Solomon created the first temple, and this was around 990 BCE. So with Solomon's temple, there was within the temple, if you go into the text, you hear the Holy of Holies. And within the Holy of Holies, this is where the Ark of the Covenant was placed. And it was placed on the foundation stone. And tradition says that this foundation stone is where Adam was created by God. This is where Cain and Abel were at. This is where the Akedah, or the binding of Isaac, took place. This is the place where Jacob's dream took place. So this foundation stone holds a lot of myth and a lot of energy and power. And only the Levites could go in. Only the priests were allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. They only went in on Yom Kippur, so they would bring with them the blood of the sacrifice along with the incense. Tradition says that even the priest had to have a string tied around his foot. So when he went into the Holy of Holies to utter the name of God, if he said it wrong, he would be struck down dead. And so they would be able to pull his body out of the Holy of Holies in case he said the name of God wrong. And then the temple was destroyed. And it was destroyed 400 years later by the Babylonians. The second temple was rebuilt by King Herod in 500 BCE. And this is where the priesthood started getting more power, because they didn't necessarily have to report to the kings. And the temple survived until 70 CE, until the Romans destroyed it. So the holiest place for Jews throughout the world is the Western Wall. And this is the place that is the closest to where people believe the Holy of Holies is at, where that foundation stone is. And so this is where the Wailing Wall is at, where every Jew should go and pay to a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and be able to share prayers at the Wailing Wall. And you'll see people write their prayers and put them in the cracks of the wall. But after the temple was destroyed, and the Romans took over, there started to become an exile, a diaspora, where the Jews went all over Europe, into Africa, into the Middle East, further into the Middle East, up into Russia. And this is where Judaism started to evolve. Because before it was all based in temple and sacrifices and rituals by the priesthood, and Judaism had to adapt. And so we went through the rabbinic Judaism movement, where all of our rules and customs and rituals started to evolve, and study became a form of worship. Sitting with the text, talking with each other, arguing over different pieces. That's how the Talmud was created. All the men were doing all of the study and writing down their thoughts and interpretations. So with the diaspora, then there came anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism is something that we really see strong when Martin Luther was leaving the Catholic Church. When he was leaving the Catholic Church, he thought, oh, I will have the Jews come on board with me. And the Jews did not. And so during this time, that is where Martin Luther was writing some pretty horrific things about Jews. And this is where stereotypes were created, very negative myths were created. For example, blood libels, the idea that we were sacrificing babies and using the blood for rituals. Jews were money handlers, because back in the day in kingdoms, handling the money was seen as a negative thing. And so then the Jews would fill those roles. The plague, when the Black Plague came to Europe, Jews were thought to be responsible for creating the plague. But then there was also the idea that Jews weren't dying at a faster rate as others with the plague, just because of the kosher rules of always washing your hands and keeping clean. There wasn't the infection rate. There was the idea that the Jews were in bed with Satan, and we were the ones that were creating the plague. Eventually, there was pogroms. As we go through history in the 1800s and early 1900s, there's many pogroms in Eastern Europe and Russia wanting to get rid of the Jewish problem and moving Jews around. So in the 1800s, there was a mass movement of Jews moving to the United States. And when Jews were coming to the United States, they wanted to assimilate. They were changing their names, and there was a new movement. So everybody was Orthodox until around in the 1800s. And this is where the conservative movement and the Reform movement came into being. And that is in the attempts of being modern and fitting into the community. And the Reform took on more roles or more rituals that you would see more in a church setting, and how things are set up for just how the services are set up. So in the late 1800s, Zionism became prominent. In response to all of the anti-Semitism, it was this idea of, let's go back to Israel so we can find safety, so we can get away from this anti-Semitism. And this is where Theodor Herzl came with his writings, The State of Israel, in 1896. And so originally Zionism started growing with this idea, okay, we can be safe, let's get to Israel because of all the hatred and the discrimination that we are experiencing. But I want to note, anti-Zionism has been around just as long as Zionism. So there are Jews that have been anti-Zionist since this time. Of all the different traditions that you find in Judaism, you can find Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. And they have varying reasons why they're anti-Zionists. The concerns of getting in the way of God's wishes, getting in the way of creating the third temple, getting in the way of the Messiah coming, getting in the way of hurting people. There's already people there. Why would we do this? So there's many different reasons why there is anti-Zionism for the last couple hundred years. Aliyah in Hebrew means to ascend. And so this, when you move to Israel, you make Aliyah, you ascend to the Holy Land. And because of the pogroms that were happening in Eastern Europe and Russia, the first major Aliyah to the land of Israel was in 1881. Then in the second Aliyah, the big wave was between 1904 and 1914. And this is when the kibbutz system was set up. The third Aliyah was 1919 to 1923. And you get a sense of what is happening now in Europe with the rise of World War I and then the rise of Nazism. And the fourth Aliyah, 1924 to 1929, and of course the fifth Aliyah is because of the Holocaust. The Holocaust between 1941 and 1945, there were 6 million Jews who were systematically murdered. I took a class, a post-Holocaust Jewish and Christian theology class in college with my rabbi at the University of Minnesota. And the rabbi asked our class, who do you think is the most evil person with the Holocaust? And people said, oh, Hitler. And he said, no, it's the mathematician who sat down to figure out how can I get as many people murdered without having to use bullets, because the Nazi soldiers, it's taking a toll on them. So it was the mathematician who figured out with gas how many people you could murder. And that stood with me, the person that does the planning behind the stage. So after the Holocaust, there's boats of survivors. They don't know where to go because Germany isn't safe, Europe isn't safe. So there are boats of survivors, but America doesn't want them. South America doesn't want them. And so let's not have the Jews with us. Let's send, they are fond of Israel. Let's just send them over to Israel because we don't want to deal with them. And so then eventually the state of Israel was created in 1948. But before that, it was a British mandate, Palestine, officially from 1922 to 1948. I have a list of all the different people who have lived on the land of Israel. And just some of them are the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Turks, the Crusaders, the Egyptians, the Ottomans. So this land has a particular affinity to so many people. So Jewish holidays. How does Israel show up in Judaism? It shows up in everything. All of our holidays are centered around what is happening in Israel. The harvest time, the planting time, the fasts of when the temples were destroyed. All of our prayers mention Israel. Our main prayer, the Shema, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, there is only one God. So when we are talking about Israel, we are talking about many different things. We're talking about our patriarch, the person who wrestles with God and wrestles with his family and wrestles with humanity. The people who believe in the one true God. There's the Holy Land and then there's the country. It's kind of tough being God's chosen people. It's a lot of pressure that we get from the outside world. Some people in my community support Israel unconditionally. Some don't want to talk about it at all. Some are anti-Zionists. But what Judaism teaches me is what Rabbi Hillel said. What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the whole Torah. The rest is explanation. So go and learn. The Talmud teaches me to save a life is to save the world. And that's what I'm passing on to my 10-year-old son. Rabbi Heschel was part of the civil rights movement working with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when he walked across the bridge in Selma, afterwards a congregant asked Rabbi Heschel, "Did you have time to pray?" And he said, "I prayed with my feet." And that's what we're doing here today. Maybe not with our feet, but with our minds, but doing things. I'll leave you with a midrash. And a midrash is what I call the white on the page. It's more of the story hidden. And the midrash says, when God created Adam and Eve, why didn't he just populate the world all at once? He had the power to do that, right? He only created Adam and Eve because God wants us to remember we have a shared ancestor and that we're all related. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So this begins kind of our roughly 10-minute segment where you are allowed to stand up and stretch. Of course, speak to your neighbor, but if you do have a particular question for Jen, you're welcome to raise your hand, bring it to me personally, and I can ask as well. Really, whatever works for you. Of course, there are refreshments in the back, the resource table. All of that is available as well. When you are ready to ask something, just get my attention, and we can direct things that way. Oh, we have a question already. Go ahead. Or no, you're carrying the mic around. Okay. I was like, whoa, Gloria's already got a question.
Thank you. But could you repeat, and I probably wasn't listening carefully enough, and then on to something else. Could you repeat what you said about Martin Luther and the Jewish people and when he was leaving the Catholic Church? And a little bit more about that.
Okay, so when Martin Luther was leaving the Catholic Church, reforming the idea of Christianity, in part of his work was hoping maybe the Jews will come along on this with the reforming of Christianity. And the Jews did not. And so he wrote some pretty horrific things that you can see in his writing. A great resource to learn more about that is with the United States Holocaust Museum. They have a great website, and there's a 13-minute video about the history of anti-Semitism. And it really, really took steam with Martin Luther's writings.
Maybe. Yep. Thank you for that question. And thank you, Jen. Any others? Oh, go ahead.
I really appreciate what you are doing, but I was raised a Lutheran, and I never heard about that. And it breaks my heart a bit because that was something that I'm hoping that now, as children are in catechism in the Lutheran Church, that they hear something about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pretty
Just so
heavy
people
voice.
online can hear you.
Question for you. You didn't mention that at the end of World War II, the only country that did open their doors to our Jewish brothers and sisters was Palestine. Is there a reason why you didn't mention that?
There was so much that
Is she ready now? Okay, now go ahead and start.
there's so much that I could have added to this presentation, so it wasn't an intentional.
So I'm lucky enough that I went from being Christian to becoming Muslim. And in that journey, I studied a lot between Judaism, Catholicism, Baptist, Lutheran, Mormon, and then I become Muslim. And in that, I've learned a lot about what goes on over there. And one of the things that have always intrigued me is that I met a gentleman who was in his 90s, a Jewish brother, and he used to sit with the Muslims and drink coffee with his grandfather and his father. And he told me that nowadays you can't do that because you don't know what radical group will shoot you. Okay? So radicalism has created the problem. Not Judaism, not Christianity, not Islam, but radicalism. And that's one of the things that I'd like to hear get brought out. Because we've been invited to Freeman many times, and has always got along with everybody here. Sorry, I'm shaking.
Yeah. No.
Because Brother Shaquille told me I had to be nice. So I'm trying to be really nice as I say this, because there's a lot of pain in here, because people have covered up so much brutality, and then to hear people that say they back Israel without knowing what's going on over there, or they back Palestine without knowing what's happened. You know, how can we hate Hitler and then turn around and look the other way as the same thing is happening to another group of people? I'll give you the mic back before I step off.
Thank you for your comments, though. We feel the weight and the burden, and that is part of our goal. Please know in holding this space is that it is a free space to hopefully express those kinds of things, ask those hard questions. And so thank you. Yes, we have another question over here.
You mentioned that there are so many different groups of people that have an affinity to that area of Jerusalem, of Israel, moving in and out. And I'd be curious, like, did any of them leave willingly, or were they all chased out by each other? Is it always some other group coming in, pushing out who is there? And I know the reference of it's the land of milk and honey. It seems so dry, and I understand like the world ecology changes over time. Why is, and the stone is very important, the Wailing Wall and that, but why is that area so important still? Is it just the and you used the word myth, and I agree, like all of these different religions have different stories that go with them. Is it just those stories? Can you say a little bit more about that?
I can only speak from my belief system, my personal, how I show up in Judaism. Myth builds a lot of power, and myth can bring belonging and identity and shape so much. And Israel, the stories, the Torah, all of those texts, to know that there was a place where these stories happened can bring attachment. And knowing that your origins, the origin story of Judaism is there. So there is that attachment to it. The idea of the land of milk and honey, that could be a whole other text going into, we could do a Torah study on it. But Israel also has the idea of being free from anti-Semitism too in Judaism. You want that place where you're just not going to get hurt anymore. You want that place where you're not going to be treated differently anymore. You want that place where it's just not going to hurt. And as for, the idea of nationalism, right? When we bring religion and nationalism together, we run into problems. We see that here in the United States. We have Christian nationalism, just like in Israel. We have Jewish nationalism in India. You have Hindu nationalism. You have Muslim nationalism. You have, whenever this happens, this is when we run into power issues and problems and hurt. So what is happening in Israel right now is wrong. And I am a member of Jewish Voices for Peace, which is an anti-Zionist movement here in the United States. So just because I'm talking to you about Judaism and its relationship to Israel doesn't mean that I support what is happening over in Israel. I'm just giving you a little bit of an understanding of Judaism's relationship to Israel and the importance of it.
Thank you. Thank you. We feel that weight too. So thank you for your vulnerability. So I think we're going to move on to our next presenter. It's been a little over 10 minutes. And so Roy Kaufman will be presenting the Christian perspective of the religious significance of the Holy Land. Many of us here who are local to Freeman are very familiar with Roy. He is a retired pastor of the Salem Mennonite Church, or the South Church. Oh, I'm in your way. No, I'll just take that. There. And I will read this while they do that. He grew up in this area and returned back to this area after his studies. He studied at Mennonite Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana, where I am also studying right now, graduating in 1969. He has written many things, including 2 books which are published, The Drama of a Rural Community's Life Cycle and Healing God's Earth, Rural Community in the Context of Urban Civilization. Roy is widowed and has 3 adult daughters and 2 grandchildren. Without further ado, Roy, I offer you this time. And again, just for your own benefit, about 20 or so minutes, and then we'll have 10 more minutes for questions. So if you do have a question for Jen, in the meantime, we can always add that in at that time too. Any way I can help? Oh, do you want to hold it? Okay. There we go.
Okay.
Now you should be good.
Okay. These other speakers have it easy. They aren't speaking to a hometown crowd, and so I'm a little anxious about doing this because too many of you guys know me, and wow, a lot of pressure here. So sorry about that. But I'll tell a little about myself as I go along, but I'm going to stick pretty close to the script because they gave me only 20 minutes. As for people of Muslim or Jewish faith, Abraham was revered by people of Christian faith as a spiritual ancestor. Though their ethnic identity, our ethnic identity as Christians, does not derive from Abraham as it does for many Jewish and Muslim believers. Abraham was led by God to sojourn in Canaan, or the Holy Land, But we often forget that Abraham was a refugee from the early civilization of Chaldea in Mesopotamia, between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Perhaps Arab and Jewish people who wish to trace their ancestry to Abraham are not native to Palestine after all, because Abraham came from somewhere else. Abraham did not come to an empty land in Palestine, for Genesis 12:6 reminds us that at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Someone is always there first. Abraham lived in Palestine as a sojourner and never owned more than a burial plot at Al-Khalil or Hebron. It seems to me that perhaps Abraham is a model for how God might wish that we humans live on any land, including the Holy Land, as sojourners, caring for the land. The Holy Land, or mostly referred to today as Greater Palestine, is a land bridge between the African and the Asian continents. Africa along the Nile River, the Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamia along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These were the two ancient civilizations, and Palestine was caught between them. It was the route our ancient ancestors took on their journey out of Africa to populate the world. Caught between the ancient civilizations of Egypt and along the Nile River and Mesopotamia, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the people living in Palestine rarely ruled themselves. They were dominated by the more powerful empires to the south and the north, by the Egyptians from the south, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, or the Greeks, or beginning in the first century of the Common Era, before the Common Era, by the Romans. The only exception was in the middle there, the Israelite Empire under David and Solomon in the 10th century before the Common Era, a development God permitted, but I don't think he was very happy about it if you read 1 Samuel chapter 8. Unlike many Jewish and Muslim people of faith, people of Christian faith generally have no ethnic or national identification with Palestine or the homeland. My ancestors never lived there. Most of yours never lived there. The exception is the small Palestinian Christian churches, many with roots going back to the time of Jesus and the first century of the Common Era. These tiny Palestinian Christian churches are seen as ethnically Arab, like the Arab population of Israel and Palestine. But as liberation theologian Miti Raheb says in his books, they prefer to see themselves and other Palestinian people as the indigenous people of the land, who will have lived under foreign domination for all of the past 2 millennia and more, along with their Muslim and Jewish Palestinian neighbors, many who never left that land. These tiny churches are now leaders in advocating for justice for all residents of Palestine and seeking the peace of Jerusalem all these faiths long for. And by the way, these Palestinian Christian churches are totally decimated by what's happened in Palestine over the last several decades. Despite not having ethnic or national roots in the Holy Land, nations and kingdoms and empires claiming to be Christian have for the last 2 millennia sought to conquer and rule the Holy Land. I speak now as a Anabaptist Christian for whom the term Christian nation is an oxymoron. I can't put those two terms together in my head. European Anabaptists, my ancestors in the 16th century, were virulently persecuted by Christendom because they followed Jesus' way of love. By Martin Luther, by the way, too. Christian faiths, as often happens with other faiths as well, was co-opted by secular rulers and empires to bless and sanctify their political aims. but the faith is always distorted in the process. And the purpose ultimately is not to advance the faith, but to rule and exploit and dominate other peoples deemed to be enemies or exploitable populations. So in the 4th century of the Common Era, the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. It is doubtful he himself was ever a Christian believer, although his mother, Helena, probably was. She built a lot of temples in the Holy Land. So Palestine became a part of the Christian Byzantine Empire based in Constantinople, now Istanbul, from around 325 to 638, the second line in this chart. When Palestine came under the rule of the Arab Umayyad dynasty after the rise of Islam. While sites in the Holy Land sacred to the people of Christian faith were preserved and built in these centuries, I don't think the indigenous people of Palestine, Jewish or Christian at the time, benefited from the rule of the Byzantine Empire. They were just another one of those colonies that could make the empire richer. That's the story of Palestine throughout 2.5, 3 millennia. It's always a colony for somebody else to exploit. And by the way, Charity, it's a lovely land, and it is a land of milk and honey in many ways. We'll see that in just a few minutes. Christian imperial rule returned to Palestine once again. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a whole paragraph. A much more heinous Christian intrusion into Palestine occurred in the 12th and 13th centuries of the Common Era, when European Christian kingdoms embarked on crusades to free the Holy Land from peoples prejudicially referred to as Muslim infidels. These were disastrous military endeavors, not only for the peoples and lands of the Middle East who suffered the violence, but also for these kingdoms of Europe as well. This was the era, I think, when Christian anti-Semitism and Islamophobia really took shape in its most virulent forms. Martin Luther had his deal too, but I think it started earlier and much more pervasively in Christianity, because we always tended to think it's those Jews who killed Jesus. And so we had an anti-Jewish thing going since the 1st century. A European Christian kingdom was established in Palestine from 1099 to 1187, when Jerusalem returned to Muslim rule that subsequent crusades could not dislodge. In my opinion, the Crusades were an unmitigated evil perpetrated in the name of Christ and did nothing good for the cause of Christian faith or for the people or the land of Palestine. Christian imperial rule returned to Palestine once again with the colonial rule of Great Britain, the second to the last line, over many lands in the Middle East, including Palestine, after the First World War, 1918 roughly to 1948. During this time, as Jen mentioned, Jewish and Christian Zionism emerged in Great Britain and the Christian West, dreaming of a homeland for the long-exiled Jewish people somewhere in the Middle East. This movement intensified with the Holocaust in Germany during World War II. So, Great Britain gave up its colonial rule of Palestine in 1948 to make way for separate Jewish and Palestinian states in Palestine. The first panel on this slide shows the land that was Arab in 1946. The second one shows the land that was divided by the UN between Jewish people, the white areas, and Palestinian people. That was supposed to be Palestine and Israel, the two countries. And the third and fourth panels show what's left of Palestine after these decades since 1948. How can you make a state out of those islands of Palestinian territory that are left? The Palestinian state never emerged alongside the Jewish state of Palestine, the state of Israel. And in the decades since, the possibility of a Palestinian state has become increasingly impossible given Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory, permitted, if not sanctioned, by the Western sponsors of Israel, most notably the United States. We are the ones responsible for what's happened in these series of panels. We here in the United States are responsible. I have reviewed this troubling history of Christian imperial meddling in the Middle East to acknowledge and confess that people of Christian faith have a sordid heritage of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Though my personal faith and my church disavow this imperial history of prejudice as a betrayal of genuine Christian faith, I acknowledge that as a white American Christian of European descent, I do bear responsibility for this history and for the injustices and the violence against the people of Jewish and Muslim faith that has been and is being perpetrated. It is my and our responsibility as people of Christian faith to help stop the cycles of violence and injustice that all the people of the Middle East confront daily. As a Christian, I'm deeply grateful that Jewish people who suffered so much for centuries, particularly from Christian anti-Semitism, have been able to find a homeland in Palestine. At the same time, I'm deeply grieved that all the Palestinian people, including those in Gaza, the Palestinian Christian churches, and the Palestinian citizens, the Arab citizens of Israel, have been oppressed and displaced in the process. I believe it is possible for Jewish and Christian and Muslim people to live together in peace in Palestine. Indeed, many already do. But it won't happen as long as imperial powers, including the Christian United States, keep using Israel and Palestine as pawns in their strategic power games. The Holy Land is a place important to Christian believers like myself because it is a place where Jesus lived in the first century of the Common Era. Even though most of us have no ethnic or national ties to the land, Bethlehem is presumed to be the place where Jesus was born, and it also has a strong Palestinian Christian presence as well as a number of Palestinian refugee camps. The entrance to this refugee camp features a keyhole with a key on top. These are symbols for the Palestinian people who left their villages in 1948, took the keys of their house with them because they expected to be back home the next week or the next week after that. And they never got home, and they live in refugee camps to this day. Bethlehem is presumed to be the place where Jesus was born. Nazareth, a largely Arab city of some 70,000 in the Israeli state, is where Jesus is presumed to have grown up. Local Christians have established Nazareth Village on the outskirts of the city, recreating the feeling of a first-century Palestinian village. And of course, Jerusalem is on the site of Jesus' death and presumed resurrection in the year 30 of the Common Era. For me and for many Christian believers, the presumed holy sites like this are less significant than the land itself. Early in our marriage, my wife and I lived for a couple of years on the island of Crete in Greece, working with the Greek Orthodox Church. This, for me, was Bible land, and after that I had little interest or possibility of visiting the Holy Land across the Mediterranean. Then, in the late 1990s, our oldest daughter, Joanne, serving with community peacemaker teams, or CPT, lived for several 3-month terms in the city of Al-Khalil, or Hebron, in the West Bank. Hebron is a Palestinian city with a population of about 250,000 Arab people, but several hundred Jewish settlers have also moved into Hebron, protected by Israeli Defense Forces. With frequent violence against the Palestinians of the city, the small CPT's mission at checkpoints like this was to be a buffer between the Palestinians on the one side and the settlers in the Israeli military on the other. It is one of the ways people of Christian faith have sought to build peace in the Holy Land. In 2008, my wife and I were able to plan a sabbatical from the Salem Mennonite Church here in Freeman, where I was serving as pastor. Intrigued by our daughter's experience in Hebron and wanting to learn more ourselves, we joined a CPT delegation a group of a dozen or so people who visited Hebron, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and the Arab and Christian Palestinians and Jewish Israelis and settlers, learning about efforts to build peace on all sides. After my wife's death, I went on another CPT delegation with a friend in 2015. On both trips, we also visited Nazareth and the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel on our own. On the 2015 trip, my friend and I walked the Jesus Trail, a 10-day walk through the countryside from Nazareth, in the lower left-hand corner of this picture, to the Sea of Galilee and then back to Nazareth through Mount Tabor, the traditional site of the Transfiguration of Jesus. We stayed in Jewish villages, Arab villages, and homes as we experienced the beautiful land of Palestine. These pilgrimage walks in the Holy Land profoundly influenced and informed my Christian faith. Forgive me if I now speak confessionally for a moment about what the Holy Land means to me, but I think that we must do this in interfaith settings like this. Christian faith is an incarnational faith, believing that God, the divine presence, came to live with us in the person of Jesus, that Jesus was God's Son. Walking the lands where Jesus walked strengthened my faith in the incarnation. If God cared enough about this world and all humanity to become human in the person of Jesus at that particular time and in that particular place, then that affirms for me how precious every human person and every land is to God. I dream of a time when all the people of Palestine, of whatever ethnicity or nationality, people of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths, will be able to live together in peace in the land so holy to each of these faiths. I dream of a time when people of all these faiths from nations around the world will be free to visit these sites in the land holy to them. We happened to be in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, 2008, and it was so moving to see pilgrims from Africa and Asia and Latin America all there to make the pilgrimage from the Mount of Olives to the old city of Jerusalem during the Christian Holy Week. Unfortunately, an Israeli security wall behind these signs separated the Arab village of Bethany on the Mount of Olives from the holy city of Jerusalem. So people could not walk from the village of Bethany to the holy city of Jerusalem as Jesus did because of the Israeli security wall. My dream for the Holy Land has been only partially realized. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. This again begins a 10-minute time, if you want to call it that, for you to both stretch and maybe grab something to drink, go to the restroom if you need to, as well as we have someone with the microphone. And so as you think about the questions you might have, one that was shared with me, Jen, for you, and you are, as always, welcome to refuse to answer any questions. I forgot to say that for our presenters, that if there is a question you're uncomfortable with answering, I have no problem at all with you saying, I don't feel I can answer that adequately. But the question was posed to me, what is the biggest stumbling block in Judaism to the Christian tradition's belief that Jesus is Messiah? And this might be really more informative for us who have always been Christian and have no sense of our Jewish brothers and sisters in our world too. Right. So do your best, but please,
Okay.
we are gracious. We are gracious.
Jesus was a really good Jew. we believe that everything that Jesus taught in the New Testament is Jewish. It's just we didn't believe, and historically, yes, there was a Jesus. We don't doubt that. It's just the coming back piece that we just don't agree with. So I think there was the idea, in Judaism, the idea of a Messiah only happens when we bring peace on earth. So when we ate from the tree, we were told, you're on your own. It's kind of like my son Jacob. You know, he has freedom of will and does his own thing as his mom. I try to give him all the good tools and help him make the right decisions, but he's on his own. And it's kind of like that with God and us. We're on our own. The only time that the Messiah is going to come is when we clean up the mess and when we do good things and do nice things and treat each other as relatives and bring peace on earth. That's the only time that we deserve to have the Messiah come. And in some traditions, you won't hear of a Messiah in Judaism, you'll hear of a messianic era. And it's the idea of this peace that we brought. And we do that by doing good things and just being nice. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. So we do have the microphone available. Please just raise your hand or get Gloria's attention with any questions for Roy or for Jen. Oh, go ahead. Oh, you're not on yet. Hold on just a second. I'm sorry. We just want to make sure people online can hear
This
you.
is for Mr. Kaufman. You were talking about Christ, and you had said the presumed resurrection of Christ. Is that what you believe, that was presumed?
I don't know that anybody's ever proved it. I don't think you can. It's an article of faith. It's not a fact. Yes, I believe it happened, but that's a statement of faith, not a declaration of absolute truth. Because I can't prove it. Nope. But it's an article of faith. That's why we're here. You know, we're here to talk about our faith, and faith is not something you nail down with absolutes. It's something you sense and you respect and you own. And so I own the resurrection of Jesus as a fact in my life. But I can't prove that he rose from the dead.
Thank you, Roy. Any others? Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
So my question to both of you, actually, I'm a Christian person. I'm a Christian person from very beginning. I'm a Ukrainian, and my parents lived through a difficult time. We've been prosecuted for our faith and all that, so for me, Christianity is important. So when you said that when we ate from the fruit, right, we committed a sin. And then you said the only way to make peace by just being nice. The true fundamental thing that what I believe is that we have sinned. That sin still lives in us all the way from the very beginning when Adam and Eve have sinned. This is why Jesus Christ had to come to take the punishment that we deserve so that by faith in Jesus Christ alone, we can be saved. If I accept that with my heart, I mean, because I can't just sit here and just nod my head, because this is very important to me. I believe that Jesus Christ came down on this earth as God, like you said, as God himself. So while walking on this earth, he accepted the punishment on himself so that by faith in him, we would become nice, become good, because deep down, all the way from the very beginning, that sin still lives in us. Doesn't matter what it is. I truly believe that because of that sin, that's why there's so much disagreement. There's so much war going on in this world. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you for that confession of your conviction as a Christian. I think the hard part there is I don't know that I heard a question there, and I don't know that there's anything you all want to respond to, but if there is something, go ahead. So
From a theological point of view in Judaism, when they ate from the tree, it wasn't a sin. So there isn't that original sin idea in Judaism. So that's just a big
parting of ways.
Yeah, just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that statement.
Yeah, thank you for articulating that. So hold on a second. We're going to give Roy a chance to respond, and then if you'd like to ask again, Roy, is there something you wanted to say for it?
Well, I don't add to what Jen said, is that you have a particular notion about original sin and about salvation, which I don't deny, and which is a part of Christianity, but it's not the only way to understand the Christian faith. And I think that putting it in the stark terms that you did creates more divisions between faiths than helping to understand how we share many things in common.
Go ahead if you'd like to respond.
No, the biggest thing that kind of boggles my mind is that we are trying to bring the peace, right? And I'm trying to get down to a very deep core of it. What really causes it? And I believe that it is because we have sinned, because we have committed it, because in Adam, like we read in the Bible, everybody have sinned. But through faith in Jesus Christ, we can be saved. Because for me, I can't be like, I absolutely for peace on earth and loving one another. Absolutely, because I believe that Jesus Christ, that's what he brought. He brought the love and kindness and all of those things, right? Yeah. Because this is what we are for here. That's why we're gathered here together.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes.
We hear your conviction, and I think the hardest part is that we all come to faith differently, and so that's why it's hard. Like, we want to receive what you're offering us, while at the same time knowing that we come at our faith traditions in different ways, and that's what we're articulating today. Would that be a good summary of? And so thank you. You've articulated another form of conviction within Christianity, and so that's really helpful.
Correct, and I'm gonna stand strongly behind what I believe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Any others? Oh, yes, go ahead, Shaquille.
You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank all of you, everyone who's here and participating in the discussion. This is a little change of topic. I just wanted to comment on what both Jen and Roy shared regarding the rivers of milk and honey. In the Quran, there is mention of rivers of milk and honey, and I wanted to read the verse for everybody and then read the meaning, if that's okay. This is in the chapter titled Muhammad. It's chapter 47, and it's verse number 15. Almighty God says, I'm going to recite it in the original Arabic, and then I'll read the translation. And this is just for our own, curiosity. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. مثل الجنة التي وعد المتقون فيها أنهار من ماء غير آسٍ وأنهار من لبن لم يتغير طعمه وأنهار من خمر لذة للشاربين وأنهار من عسل مصفى ولهم فيها من كل الثمرات ومغفرة من ربهم كمن هو خالد في النار وسقوا ماء حميما فقطع أمعاءهم. صدق الله العظيم. And I'll just read the translation of that verse. In the name of Almighty God, the most gracious, the most merciful. The parable of paradise, which is promised to the righteous. Therein are rivers of water not polluted, and rivers of milk that doesn't change its taste or sour, and rivers of wine delicious for the drinkers, and rivers of honey purified, and for them therein of all fruits and forgiveness from their Lord, like he who will abide, and likewise he who will abide forever in the fire, that they will be given to drink water boiling, so that it cuts into pieces in their intestines. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaquille. I will offer that to you all if there's anything you'd like to respond to there, but you don't have to.
I am always moved when I hear Shaquille. So I really appreciate that piece. Yeah, so thank you, Shaquille. It's always just so moving.
I love the recitation, and I was, worshipped with the Greek Orthodox Church for a number of years, and it sounded very familiar to me, the intonations and the cadences. We learned it from you guys, I guess.
Okay, well, would you like to ask a question? Yeah, go ahead. If we have one right now, go for it.
So this question is for Jen, I guess. So you were saying how, during your presentation, you were talking about how Jews are very connected to the land, and it comes out in your worship, and it comes out in your Judaism. So I've been trying to understand this myself because I feel like there's so much of it that I don't understand. The people in Israel, the Zionists, I guess in particular, do you think that they're mostly just secular, or are they deeply rooted in their faith? Because then you mentioned that the Messiah will come down only when we clean up our act, and so when we're good to each other. And so I guess I'm just curious, is that what Netanyahu believes when he's killing innocent people? Or does he feel like maybe he's justified and therefore it's justified in his head? I don't know. I'm confused.
Go ahead.
As a Jew and from South Dakota, from my vantage point, God's not involved. If God was involved, we wouldn't be where we're at. This is where that nationalism piece comes into play. We have a saying, Jew by tribe, Jew by faith. So it becomes really complicated too, because it's an identity, maybe not necessarily a faith tradition. So you do have secular Jews, and they identify as Jews. Maybe they'll show up for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur once a year, but it's not something that they practice. And I think you have that in a lot of faith traditions. People identify, but there's this idea of this tribe and the connectedness. But this is where that nationalism piece is coming in. We're not going to have the Messiah anytime soon with this. And they're not thinking about that. If they were thinking about God, we wouldn't be where we're at.
Thank you. So I am going to just ask if you do have a question to hold it or write it down or come talk to me maybe, and I can share it or make sure we get it the next time. But I want to make sure John has enough time. And so John, I'll ask you actually if you need to hook your computer up and get things running, I'll introduce you as you do so. Our last presenter is John Landis. John is a fourth-generation Californian who moved to Sioux Falls in 2022. John grew up in the Christian church and reverted to Islam in 2011. He graduated from Stanford University with a degree in philosophy and economics. He is a career CFO specializing in food manufacturing companies. He is married with 3 grown children. John, when you are ready, you are welcome to begin. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Can we hear me? No, the mic's not. I need to be closer? Okay, swallow the mic. All right. So, ironically, Landis is a Mennonite name. And my family originated in Pennsylvania, and apparently my great-grandfather was something of a black sheep. And he went to California back in the gold rush time. My grandfather was born in 1871 in Rough and Ready, California, which is a gold rush town. And I have been in California ever since, until I had a friend invite me to join him at Orion Foods in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which makes pizza components. And so I've been here for 2 years. In terms of my personal religious walk, my grandfather was a Methodist minister, and I grew up in the Methodist Church. In college, I became a member of Peninsula Bible Church, which was an independent kind of fundamentalist Bible church, and then had a falling from the church and was introduced to Islam and joined Islam 13 years ago, reverted to it. And so I really don't come with the credentials that the other 2 speakers do. I tried to research this topic, which is pretty narrow. The topic is just, why is Jerusalem relevant to Muslims? So I'll try and walk you through my understanding, but please forgive me if I don't have some of the answers to your questions, and I'll call my Muslim brothers and sisters to help me. I'll do the best I can. So, not surprisingly, the connection that Muslims have to Jerusalem is very similar to the connection that the Jews and the Christians have to Jerusalem, because it's based upon the life of Abraham. And Abraham is very foundational to the Muslims. In fact, you'll find him mentioned in the Quran 69 times. There are stories about Abraham that you find in the Quran that you don't find in the Bible or in the Torah, because there's extra details that were given in Revelation to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by God. And in fact, in the revelation that he received, he was called to follow the religion of Abraham. Specifically, in the 16th chapter, in the 123rd verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God asks Muhammad, to follow the religion of Abraham. And so he was born in Babylon, and he was the son of a stonemason and a woodworker, and his father specialized in making idols, which, if you're a follower of God, that's a little bit of a problem. So as a young man, he is, and there's many stories in the Quran talking about this, he's forced to confront his father, and then the elders of the town in which he grew up in, and then eventually the king, about these idols, and how, you're praying to things that don't even move, right? And he actually knocks them down one night. And who knocked down all of our idols? Well, the other idols did. And then they said, well, that's not true. They can't do that. You're lying. So you yourself are testifying that the idols are incapable of doing anything. So why do you worship them? Why do you not worship the one God? So Abraham has a hard time convincing all of the people there that there is one true God. They want to follow in the way of their fathers, and they want to worship the idols. So he eventually leaves Babylon, as requested by God, and he only convinced two people to follow him, Lot and Sarah, who becomes his wife. And so they move to Palestine, and Abraham is promised by God to have as many children as children as sands in the sea. And at a very old age, when he's past childbearing years, when Sarah's past childbearing years, he has two sons, Isaac with Sarah, and Ishmael with Hagar, or Hajra, Arabic pronunciation. And he obeyed God's request to sacrifice his son, similar to what Jen was talking about. And in the Quran, it doesn't say it was Ishmael. It just says his son. But not surprisingly, the Islamic scholars have determined that it was Ishmael that he was planning to sacrifice, not Isaac. But, it's always an indirect conclusion that they come to. But in either case, the story is equally powerful. And I think that's important as we look at Islam and Judaism and Christianity. We sometimes get hung up in the details that we argue about. Which son was he wanting to sacrifice? And we're going to argue about that. But the reality is, the power of the story is that Abraham himself had enough faith that he was willing to sacrifice his son. And a conviction and a belief that God would still bring about children as many as the sands in the sea and stars in the sky. So, and I think you'll find that as a theme anytime you try and look at Christianity, Islam. The power and the fundamental nature of God is very similar. The mechanics often are different. The details are often different. So, the final part that I want to talk about Abraham is the building of two houses of worship. He built in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, with his son Ishmael, the Kaaba, Masjid al-Haram. And he built in Jerusalem with his son Isaac, Masjid al-Aqsa, or the temple, and before Solomon, right? And Solomon was rebuilding on former grounds that were a house of worship. And there are even some scholars in Islam that believe that Masjid al-Aqsa was originally built by Adam. It's a little stretch to get the details to support that. But what you find here is that the connection from Muslims into Jerusalem is founded on the same history as for the Jews. So you can see here quickly a path where Abraham migrated from Ur of the Chaldeans along the Euphrates River up to Haran, where he stayed for 20 or 25 years, and then down into Jerusalem and the Palestinian area. This is Masjid al-Aqsa. It's the second oldest mosque in history, if you believe that he built it with Jacob, and that it wasn't built on the foundations of an earlier mosque. It was the original direction of prayer for the Muslims when the first Muslim church started, and they put their prayer rags down and they prayed to God. They prayed in the orientation of wherever they were, pointed to Masjid al-Aqsa. Jerusalem was a holy land. It was the land of Abraham, which is the religion to which Islam was called. And in fact, it's one of the three great mosques that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam calls people to, travel to, and pray to. And you get more reward if you pray in one of these mosques. And in fact, if you pray in Masjid al-Aqsa, your prayer counts 500 times as much as if you pray anywhere else, or other than one of the other mosques. But and the point is, it is a very important place of worship for the Muslims. It's the burial site for many of the prophets. And in fact, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was recorded as saying, a day will come when the most beloved thing that a man can have is a piece of land that looks not on the Kaaba, but looks on Masjid al-Aqsa. So it is a very important part of the Islamic concept of the Holy Land, is the prophets, not only of Abraham, not only of Isaac, of Ishmael, but also Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all of the Hebrew prophets, the Jewish prophets, are referenced in the Quran as well. Many, many stories about them. Sorry. So I just want to go through a quick timeline. I'm going to do this really quick. It's repetitive to some extent with what Jen and Roy did. You have the life of Abraham, Ishmael and Isaac. Son of Jacob was the son of Isaac. 12 tribes of Israel. That all kind of takes place from 2000 to 1800 BC. 1600 to 1250 is the Egyptian bondage. 1250 to 1200, Moses leads the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt into the wilderness. And then finally they enter into conquering the promised land, Canaan, where they're defeating any number of tribes by physical force to take the land. And then kind of the golden years of David and Solomon in 1000 to 900 BC. And then they split into two kingdoms, Judah in the southern and Israel in the north. 721, the northern kingdom is captured and carried away in captivity by Babylon. 587, it says the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom is carried away in captivity by Babylon. And then for the next 1,200 years, Palestine was ruled by many nations. Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Syrians, Maccabees, the Romans. And if you look at that map, and I got this map from the internet based upon a video from a Western Civ professor, and he found it. He thinks it's Polish, but he wasn't sure, but he threw it up there during his video. And the thing that he liked about it, the reason he was trying to find it, is this kind of shows the two major dynasties, Rome, which had an imperial dynasty of 900 plus years, and Persia, which had an imperial dynasty of 1,200 years. And it's kind of the greenish color on the right-hand side of your screen is Persia, the left-hand side is Rome, and you can see where they are. And that white area in the bottom is Arabia. And I think one of the things that fascinated me is look at all the dots of the cities, the civilian populations in Babylon and in and the Roman countries. And as you look down, the question was about the land of milk and honey. This is sometimes, I think I was taught in history, called the Fertile Crescent, if you walk down these areas. And so anytime there was a conquering country that wanted to go anywhere to go conquer something good, well, they're not going to wander through the desert. They go down the Fertile Crescent. And Jerusalem and Palestine was right on the road for everywhere. You wanted to go to Egypt, you want to come from Egypt, you want to go from Syria, Babylon, Persia, Turkey, Greece, Rome. They all went through Jerusalem. And that's why you had all of those different nations ruling as they rose in power. So Islam begins in the midst of the war between the Romans and the Persians. And the Persians were actually better fighters than the Romans, which is kind of amazing because the Romans were pretty good in terms of their legion and fighting, but they lost most of their battles with the Persians. But what would happen is they would come west, they get to the coast, but the Romans controlled the Mediterranean Sea. and they would overextend themselves, and the Romans would land armies using their navy behind where the Persians were located, cut off their supply lines, and then force the Persians to retreat back again. So that's the push me pull you saw for over. The professor specified 56 BC, where there was one battle where Rome decided to go in and try and sack Persia, and it didn't go so well for them, and then they fought for forever. So this is a war that's 700 years in process when Islam comes to being, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam becomes his public ministry in Mecca in 1614 AD, and then in 1614 Persia has one of their more triumphant pushes, and they take Shams, which is the whole Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine area. And the Persians were Zoroastrians. They didn't believe in God. They had multiple gods. And they slaughtered 90,000 Christians, just slaughtered them. And they desecrated all the holy sites. They carried away the Holy Cross, which was, this is the cross that Jesus was supposed to have died on. So you can imagine how big a deal it was to the Christians. And the Jews, which were a small population in Jerusalem at the time, got a big fight coming. Who am I going to side with? I think I'm going to side with the big bully that's got the club, and they sided with the Christians. So they got to stay in some form of subservient state while the Christians all got slaughtered. So in 615, where Muhammad is, he's got a small group of followers. They're not the wealthy, they're the poor, for the most part, in Mecca. And he comes with a revelation from God that says, by the way, in the next 3 to 9 years, Rome's going to defeat the Persians. So, whatever, Muhammad. Whatever. People were not taking this very seriously. This is very early on in his ministry. So, I am so sorry. So, in 621, we have another miracle that happened that is unique to the Muslims. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam traveled by night. He was greeted while he was doing his prayer at night. And he traveled from Mecca all the way to Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And I put this map up here down below. It's hard to see. But Mecca is, 2/3 of the way south in Saudi Arabia, and Jerusalem's at the very top left-hand corner of the map. So there's no way he could physically try it. But he was given a special equine. It wasn't a horse. It wasn't a donkey. It was something different that allowed him to travel through the air. And then he goes up to heaven. He goes up all 7 levels of the heaven. He meets all the former prophets. He greets them in prayer at Masjid al-Aqsa. And while he's up in heaven, he meets God, and God tells him, you need to have your people pray 50 times a day. And he's coming back down, and Moses meets him, and he says, well, how'd the conversation go? Well, we need to pray 50 times a day. Moses says, you got to be kidding. Look, I know your people. I know my people. They are not going to pray 50 times a day. That is not happening. Go back up and ask for less. So, so he does. He goes back up, says, very humbly, he asks God, can I have somewhat less prayers for my people? And he's granted a lower number. Comes back down. Moses says, here's the lower number. Says, that is not happening. You need to ask for less. Your people can't do it. They won't do it. They will not be able to do it. Goes back up, gets given a number of 5, comes back down again. Moses said, they can't even do 5. I know your people, I know my people, they can't even do 5. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was just too shy to go back and ask for less. So as Muslims, we pray 5 times a day that came out of this miraculous journey that took place. Now, I thought it was pretty amazing that this came not from Mecca, from the Masjid al-Haram, but from Masjid al-Aqsa. And when he gets back to Jerusalem, to Mecca, and he announces to his followers, and of course his non-followers that are there listening to everything he says, and tells them about this journey, he's greeted with a dubious crowd, not surprisingly. And so he is actually given a vision by God, almost like there's a drone up there over the top of Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And he describes all the happenings in Jerusalem at a very minute detail. In fact, there was even a camel that was lost from a caravan, and he told the people where the camel was. So, the disbelievers are all saying, right, we got him now. Let's go figure this out. So they send the messenger immediately that morning. They send people to Jerusalem to go disprove all the things that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. Well, they found the camel. They found all of his descriptions were accurate, which, didn't cause the disbelievers to believe. It's magic. It's a trick. But for the believers, for the Muslims, it was validation of the experience. And so again, this isn't trying to convince anybody of the truth of the journey, but it's to explain why Masjid al-Aqsa is a very, very special place to the Muslims. So as we continue, in 630, Rome retakes Shams under Herodias, fulfilling the Quranic prophecy. Now, if you do the math, it didn't quite take place in 3 to 9 years, but it did retake. And when Rome retakes the Jerusalem and conquers Persia, so they go into Persia's main Zoroastrian temple and they destroy that. They actually were able to recapture the cross and bring it back to Jerusalem. And when they get back to Jerusalem, I remember what you Jews did. You were on the Persian side. So they slaughtered 20,000 of the Jews, kicked all the rest of them, the survivors, ran for the hills. Some of them ran for the hills. There's no Jews left. They refurbished all the churches, but the Dome Rock, the temple, I know what we can do with that. Let's make that a garbage pit. And so they took all of their trash and refuse and dumped it into the temple area, into Masjid al-Aqsa. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes away, and he is succeeded by Abu Bakr, radiyallahu anh, who becomes the first caliph of Islam. And at that time, you had about 40% of the Arabian Peninsula under Muslim control. And so Abu Bakr decides, let's create 2 armies, send one to the west and one to the east. And you saw the population center. This is a bunch of desert rats attacking the most powerful, the most technologically advanced, the most financially backed, with empires with the most resources, and heads that direction. And the Eastern Army is headed by a man named Khalid bin Walid, who is considered to be one of the greatest warriors of all time. So Khalid bin Walid conquers the rest of the eastern side of Arabia. The Western Army is also successful. And there's questions about whether or not he was asked by Abu Bakr to continue against Persia, or he just decided to do it on his own. But anyway, he continues on, and I'm going to go to the next, excuse me. So if I go back up here, and you look at the eastern side of Arabia, he went into that right-hand side that has the greenish area called Babylon, and he went over the Tigris-Euphrates River, and he had, I don't know, something like 50 battles where he went in, and he defeated the Persians. And he always did it at odds of, 15,000 versus 50,000. And there's even one battle where it's 15,000 versus 150,000. And I got these numbers not from an Islamic scholar, but from the Western Civilizations professor from the Austin Institute was giving this number. And if you're interested, in the pamphlet I got back, he's a really good lecturer, and it's fascinating to hear the story as he tells about. He's actually telling about Khalid bin Walid. So he goes up Babylon. When he gets to the top of Babylon at the Euphrates River, where it sort of joins the Roman Empire at the top of the desert, the Romans and the Babylonians say, "Hey, we got a problem here. I know we've been fighting for 700 years, but we need to take care of this Muslim army." So they join forces, and they still get beat. So now he comes down the Fertile Crescent, just like all the other conquerors does. He comes down, and he's now camped outside of Jerusalem. He takes Damascus. There was a siege there. That's how they captured Syria. And so now, by the time we get into 634 AD, he's conquered Syria and Damascus, and he moves on to Jerusalem. Now, the Roman army has abandoned the Middle East. When they got defeated, they just left. There's still a garrison force in Jerusalem, but this is Holy Lands for the Muslims. They don't want to go in and create a lot of bloodshed. So they surround the city, and Sophronius, who is the governor of Jerusalem at the time, and he's actually a Catholic saint of Jerusalem, he's stalling because he's afraid that the Muslims are going to do what the Persians did and sack the city and steal all the relics. So he's stalling, and he's trying to get the cross and all the other relics up to Constantinople where they'll be safe. And the Muslims don't want to invade. So one of his stall tactics, Sophronius, is, we'll surrender the city, we agree, but we want to do it to the Caliph, who at this time Abu Bakr has passed away, and it's Omar bin al-Khattab, who is the Caliph, and so we want, and of course, to have him come all the way to Jerusalem from, at this point, in Medina, that's a long journey, and it's not going to happen quickly. And the Muslims want to have it go well and just get this over with. And so they come up with this clever idea. Khalid bin Walid is actually Omar's first cousin, and they're both very big men, big voices, similar. So what they said was, we'll just fake it. We'll just fake it, and we'll send in Khalid bin Walid into Jerusalem. And unfortunately, Khalid bin Walid, it was famous enough that somebody in the crowd said, "That's not Omar, that's Khalid bin Walid." And so that didn't work for the Muslims. So then they finally say, okay, they get Omar. Omar never left Medina, by the way, once he became caliph, except for this one journey. And so he travels, gets on one camel, brings one servant, and he's in a garment that is tattered. It's stitched in multiple places, 15 places. And on the journey, he trades off between himself and the servant as he's traveling. So half the time one's on the camel, half the time the other on the camel. And Omar's like 60 at this time, a young man. And so by the time he gets to Jerusalem, just happened to be the time that the servant was on the camel. And so they see this mud-spattered, tattered man come and say, where's the caliph? And they're asking the guy the servant who's up on the camel, and he's the guy down there. And they said, oh, so they still didn't think he was the caliph. He said, so where's the caliph? And he says, oh, I'm the caliph. So this was a big shock to Sophronius, who came on one of those beds that's carried by the servants and was all dressed in his finest clothes. And Sophronius wants the Egyptian deal. Now, the Muslims had already taken Egypt, the Western army, and the the Egyptian deal that the Muslims gave the Christians in Egypt was, you get to worship, keep your house of worship. There's no killing. You have the rights of citizens within anybody else, and you'll be taxed, but your tax is lower than what a Muslim is taxed, because some of what the Muslim tax goes for is for the Muslim church, and you're not followers of Islam, so you shouldn't be obligated to do that. So that's what Sophronius was hoping for. So he asks Omar, what are your terms? And Omar's terms for surrender were, all Roman officials have to leave, and they can only take with them what they can carry themselves, not with pack animals. And Sophronius is like, can't believe that these are the terms. And of course, the terms of Egypt apply as well. They have to pay the tax, but they're allowed to worship, they're allowed to keep their lives. And so he gives him a tour of the city. And as he's giving him the tour of the city, they get to the Holy Church, and he asks Omar, can we go together and pray? Because he's really taken with Omar. And Omar says no. And Sophronius is offended, says, why? Omar says, the first place I pray, my followers are going to want to build a mosque there, and you're going to lose your church. Well, then can we find some place, outside to pray together? Yes, that would be fine. So they just went outside the church, found a clearing, and Omar prayed. And in fact, Omar knew his ummah very well. They brought the followers, and they built a masjid there, an Islamic place of worship, a mosque. It's called the Omar Mosque. It was destroyed in December of 2023 by Israeli missiles. It's unfortunate, but that is another place that's very important to the Muslims in terms of a holy land and a place of worship. So after they leave and pray, Omar wants to see the Temple Rock. Oh, why do you want to see that? Well, it's a holy land to us. Are you sure you want to see that? Yes. So he takes them there, and he finds the garbage dump. And he's so horrified that he gets down and begins trying to clear it in that moment of, years of rubbish. And all the Muslims that are there seeing him do it, they all get on and do it too. So they clean out the garbage, the rubbish, and claim Masjid al-Aqsa and the temple. And Omar says, and by the way, I'd like to meet the Jews of the community. And Sophronius says, there are no Jews of the community. Because, I don't know if he went into why or not, but there are no Jews here. And so Omar says, that's not acceptable. And there was a revert, a Jewish man who had become a Muslim. And Omar went to him and said, hey, can you find some Jewish families outside of Jerusalem and bring them here, because the Jews need to be a part of Jerusalem. So he found, of my two sources, one said he found 70 families, and the other source said he found 80 families, but brought Jewish families back into Jerusalem. And so with all this turmoil that took place, over those 1,200 years, there was actually 400 years of peace and stability where the various religions had the right to worship their way until the coming of the First Crusades. And it was really, it was a good time in Jerusalem, in Islam. In the second chapter, ayat 256, it says that there is no compulsion in the religion. And so if there's not a violent attacking or an attempt to take over Islam, then you live side by side with others and allow them to worship the way they want to worship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the judge between all people, and Allah will judge them. It's not your job. So anyway, just in summary, we're connected to Jerusalem because of our connection with Abraham. which we share with the other faiths. Masjid al-Aqsa is central to Islamic history and worship. It's the second masjid ever built. It's the burial site of many of our prophets. It's a key part of the night journey, and it's the first direction to which Muslims prayed. And we had 400 years of peaceful rule and coexistence when the Muslims were in charge there. And with that, I'll take any questions.
You're welcome to stay here if you want to stand up here, and I'll use this microphone.
Okay.
Thank you, John. This is more of a clarification. On your slide, you actually said it was the Emperor Herodotus. It was actually Heraclius. So if anyone's watching the recording and they're trying to verify it was the Emperor Heraclius that brought back the piece of the true cross. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Is this on? Yeah. Thank you so much, John, for your presentation. No, you're good. Go ahead. You can stay there. I just wanted to make sure to offer you that. I wanted to ask Nathan in the back as well, do we have any questions online? I forgot to ask you after the two previous presenters. Okay. Well, the floor is open. It is just a couple minutes after 4, and so I welcome you. Thank you for coming, and if you need to go, you can. But I do want to give just a few minutes to ask John or any of the other two presenters any further questions if you need to. Otherwise, you are welcome to go if you need to, no judgment at all. Yes, go ahead.
You showed the map of that whole area there.
Yeah.
Israel is just a little sliver along the Mediterranean. It's completely surrounded with Arab and Muslim nations. Mr. Kaufman showed an earlier picture that the Gaza Strip and a whole bunch of little dots where the Palestinian people were. I guess my question is, if Islam is such a beautiful religion, why don't they just take the Palestinian people out of Israel and solve the problem? You got all this Muslim ground around there. Why don't they just go there?
Well, I guess if you lived at 121 Gaza Street, and you lived there, and your father had lived there, and your grandfather had lived there, and your great-grandfather had lived there, it would be hard to have someone say, you have to move because I want your house. Yeah, and yes, and because there is, violence is being used as a means of motivating people to leave, it is effective. And many Palestinians have fled their nation because they don't want the violence for their children. But your question was, why don't we just relocate the Palestinians? And I think if anybody came here and said, you know what, we need to move people out of Freeman because we've got another group that wants that is going to take it over, there would be people here that would struggle with that concept. And I think
so I'm going to halt you to just because Jen would like to offer a response as well, and so just to add another voice to the conversation.
The Palestinians can't leave. The IDF is not allowing them to. They can't go. They can't get food. They're stuck.
Israel is not letting them leave?
No, they cannot leave. The checkpoints and the apartheid, what is going on there, they cannot leave. They do not have power. And so it's not as easy as saying just go to another place. It's not possible on so many different levels.
I just want to make sure to honor the fact that, these are very complex situations across national boundaries and a host of things. And so we can speak in generalizations as much as we might want to about what is easy or what could be easy, but that is rarely the case on the ground for families and people. So go ahead, please, with another question.
Well, I'm not sure if this fits in this conversation, and maybe for the next time, but what role or how does the Hamas or the terrorists on the Israeli, how do they fit into that?
Well, what I will say is that every group that ever wanted to gain power wants to cloak itself in legitimacy. Whether it's, things that were done under the Christian Crusades, whether it's, ISIS, whether it's the Ku Klux Klan, right? I mean, there are groups that most people here would say, Ku Klux Klan is not Christian, right? Their values are not Christian, but they call themselves Christians. And so, I don't know enough about Hamas to talk about what their overall role is. But what I would say is whenever you read about any organization that claims to be Muslim, claims to be Christian, claims to be Jewish, it doesn't mean that they are practicing Islam, that they are practicing Christianity, or they're practicing Judaism. And you have to investigate it to understand what they're doing. And so I don't think you can link Hamas to Islam any more than you can link Islam to ISIS to Islam.
Yeah, thank you, John. Jen, would you like to offer any further to that?
Agree wholeheartedly.
Okay. And Roy said amen as well to your statement. So I think our presenters are in agreement about that. And I think we all need to acknowledge, right, that we own our faith in the ways that we do, and there are other folks we may or may not disagree with about the ways they embody their faith. And so at any one time, right, we can point out that person or that group or that anybody and make sure everyone associated with them has to be this way. But that's an easy thing to do as well. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I would like to offer the thought that because humans can be messy and complex, we can be victims and perpetrators at the same time. And you see that right now in Israel, but you see it in other parts of the world, and you can see it here in South Dakota, that you can be a victim and a perpetrator at the same time.
Yes. Thank you, Jen. Okay, well, we are now 10 minutes after, so I think I will draw this to a close. I want to make sure to say thank you so much, presenters, for coming. I think we should give them another round of applause. And then I wanted to ask you all, it is already 10 after 4. Do you still welcome conversation now? Okay, all right. So just note that if you do have another question or you'd just like to talk personally with any of our presenters, you are welcome to do so. Please take refreshments, take a plate full of vegetables, fruits, cheese, all that stuff back there, a cup of coffee if you need it. Thank you so much for coming. Of course, the resource table is right there in the center back. Today's presentation was live streamed, and so it will be available on YouTube. And if you would like to listen to that in the future, please go to the Freeman Network's Facebook page. The link for today's presentation will be posted there. With that, I think I've covered everything. Oh, one last thing. Of course, the donation jar in the back. If you do and can support this and further events, we ask that you do so. And with that, if you will, join me in prayer to close our time. Almighty God, great Creator, enduring in grace and mercy, thank you for your blessing on our time together. Guard us as we leave this place. Invigorate our reflection. Inspire us to seek justice and peace for all of humanity. Amen. Thank you, and go in peace.